Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. Today I was delighted to be joined by Matt Forde. Matt Forde is an excellent comedian. He's also a comedy writer. He's a radio presenter. He hosts a fantastic podcast, well, a couple of podcasts, but the one I listen to is the Political Party podcast, where he interviews lots of really interesting guests from UK politics. He's also an excellent impressionist. And he hosts Rock and Roll Football on Absolute Radio, which many of you, I'm sure, will have listened to before, maybe in the car on the way to a football match. So I was really delighted to have Matt in. We talked about his love of Nottingham Forest and his love of UK politics, or I suppose more specifically the Labour Party, and how those two things sort of coalesce and combine with each other. We talked a little bit about Qatar towards the end, and it was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I'm very appreciative to Matt for making time and coming in, because at the moment he's very busy. He's on the road with his new show, Brexit Pursued by a Bear, which he describes in greater detail than I can later in the show. I'm actually going to see it next week at the South Bank Centre. But for those of you who might be interested to go and watch it, he's a very funny guy, and he is in Darlington. He's in Hexham, Bedford, London, Maidenhead, Leeds, York, Alnwick. I've never heard of that place. Sorry for anyone from Alnwick. Southend, Cambridge, back to London, Brighton, Cardiff, Newcastle, Glasgow, Aberdeen, basically everywhere. I mean, his dates stretch all the way into June. Yeah, I think the show ends in June. But I'm going to go see it next week in London at the South Bank Centre. I'm really excited about it. And he describes it as a show which is there for people of all different political persuasions, i.e. he takes the piss out of everyone. So I wouldn't let your political persuasion preclude you from going. So yeah, do visit, and I hope you enjoy today's episode. Thanks again to Matt for coming. Before we get started, can I say that this episode is supported by The Athletic, the best place to read about football online. If you visit theathletic.co.uk/Tifo, you can find that you will get a 7-day free trial where you can check it all out, try before you buy. And if you like it, 50% off an annual subscription, which works out to be about £2.50 per day. So please go there. That is theathletic.co.uk/Tifo, and that helps to support our podcast. So we're very appreciative to anyone who would like to try that out. Anyway, no more from me for now, and we will kickstart with Matt Forde. Matt Forde, welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast.
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for coming. I really appreciate
to be
it.
Here.
How are you doing?
Very good. In the middle of a tour at the moment, so
Are you
on the road a lot.
London next week, aren't you?
Yes. The South Bank Centre on the 10th and 27th of March, and then Darlington, Hexham. Oh God, I always forget where I'm going to be. Brighton, Nottingham, Sheffield, all over the place.
All over the place. Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm coming to your South Bank Centre show.
Oh, great!
Next Tuesday, yes.
Super.
I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, well, I'll see you there.
So, can I first ask you? You're obviously a big fan. I mean, I know you as a big fan of football and a big fan of politics. And I'd love to talk more about the sort of crossover between those two things in the UK a bit later. But first, can I ask you when you first became aware that you were a football fan?
I think Italia 90 was the first thing where I really realised I was emotionally invested in it. So I would have been 7 that summer. Right. And I'd grown up in Nottingham, obviously around that period. Forest were a big club, and we were winning trophies at Wembley in 1989 and 1990 won the League Cup, the Littlewoods Cup as it was then. So I was aware that we were kind of a big deal, but I think at that age something hadn't grabbed me yet, but I knew I was Forest, and right. I know I really liked Stewart Pearce, and that tournament just really
so you
really got a hold of me. I wept when we lost to West Germany as a 7-year-old kid. Right, and then I cried the following summer when we lost to Spurs in the 1991 FA Cup final. Right. So I had a really emotional introduction to it all.
Yeah. But you just missed out on Brian Clough in the European finals, I guess, then.
Yes, I was born in 1982.
Right.
So all the real glory stuff happened before I was born.
Just before.
Gutted.
What a drag.
I know.
Do you have an affinity with Brian Clough, presumably?
Hugely, yeah. I was lucky enough to meet him a couple of times. I was a mascot for a Forest game when he was still manager.
What was that like?
Overwhelming.
Right. Firstly,
because all the players are naked.
Yeah.
You're in a dressing room as a 9-10-year-old boy with Roy Keane It's Willie waggling around.
It makes it worse that it's Roy Keane, doesn't it?
And it was, oh God, yeah. And then it was an intimidating place, but Forest in that season, it was the first season of the Premier League, 1992-1993. We're in crisis, and it was one of our last home games in the Premier League that season. But an incredible thing to meet Clough as a child.
Right, yeah.
Huge personality.
Was it frightening?
Yeah, warm.
Yeah.
A really specific charisma, intimidating but friendly with it.
Yeah.
Then I met him again a few years later. But yeah, that was a really special. Even then, not that at the age of 9 or 10 you realise that you're going to be nostalgic for things like that.
Yeah.
But you realise you're having a special moment.
Right. Yeah.
It was like being in a cage with a kind of gorilla, I suppose. There's something I've never met anyone so charismatic, and I've met a lot of charismatic people. I've never met anyone as charismatic as Brian Clough.
Right, yeah.
And that was true the second time that I met him as well. So when there was a bit of distance, when I was a bit older, in my 20s, I think I met him.
How do you describe the charisma? I mean, I sort of know the feeling of being around someone where you recognise this is an important person.
Yeah.
But how do you describe what that is? How are they doing that?
Well, that's it. It's not just it wasn't just his status as Forest manager that was, it wasn't just the office that made him charismatic. There's something specific about him where, and even at the time he was in a bad way, he's still got a wit and it was a real mixture of warmth, fast wit, and authority, all in one. A really specific, and in the way that sports people have a specific charisma that goes with, I suppose, an elite level of attainment.
Would he have made a good prime minister?
Oh, I think he'd be one of those prime ministers. He'd have to be like a war leader, like Churchill. He'd be very good for that particular task.
Not in peacetime.
I fear, he might be too belligerent at other times.
I read a piece about him recently. I think it was published on The Athletic by Daniel Taylor, and I'm not sure if this story was known beforehand or if it just hadn't been explored fully, but I think it was Daniel Taylor, apologies if not, but anyway, Daniel Taylor spoke to a man who, when he was younger, had essentially been adopted by Brian Clough. Have you heard about this story?
No.
So I think he was from Sunderland.
Right.
And he was very young, he would have been 7 or 8 years old, and he and his brother, I think, they came from a quite impoverished background. I'll try and find the story and send it to you after. It's really interesting. And they waited outside Sunderland's ground for Brian Clough and Nottingham Forest to arrive. And I think got to say hello, and Brian Clough brought them inside the hotel and got every player to sign a poster or something for them. And they did the same thing the following year, and Brian Clough remembered them and brought them into the club and let him watch the game with him on the subs bench.
Wow.
I think developed some kind of relationship with the mother, a little bit fractious, and the boys started to spend summers with Brian Clough at his house with his wife and his family. And I did this sort of on an on-off basis for a number of years. I'd never heard about it at all.
No, I haven't.
And it's just one of those stories that I don't know. I mean, yeah, it says, particularly given that this is in a time before it's not a PR stunt or anything like that. It's just something that the man would do. It just adds like an incredible gravitas to his character. You know?
There's certain people who, I suppose it's a bit of a cliche to live life by their own rules, but he is definitely someone who did.
Right.
And that doesn't just mean in terms of being an authoritarian. It also means sort of strange acts of generosity like that, that are quite eccentric acts of generosity, I suppose, for someone of that status.
It reminds me of, there was a story about Alex Ferguson that came out when he had a brain aneurysm a few years ago. Yeah. I think people weren't certain whether he was going to live or not at this point. And a local journalist from Leicester tweeted out a thread and prefaced it by saying, I wasn't going to tell this before because the lady involved had asked me not to, but now maybe Alex Ferguson's not going to live. Here's the story. The story was that there was a Man United fan, an elderly woman who lived in Leicester, who would write into this sports journalist in Leicester every week to say, why aren't you covering Manchester United? And he would reply and say, because this is a Leicester paper. We only cover local teams here. One day she comes into the office to accost him and ask him to cover Man United more, and they get talking. Turns out that I think her husband had died a few years before, and she'd had a stroke, but she'd been a season ticket holder at Old Trafford before that. And Sir Alex Ferguson found out and had sent a car every other weekend to pick her up, to bring her to the game and pay for her season ticket
God.
for like 5-10 years or something. And this again is like not something that was public knowledge beforehand, is not a PR stunt by the club, which you feel like those stories nowadays are only done to,
yes,
infuse the brand or whatever. But again, that felt like something that, I don't know, only a special person would do and never tell anyone about,
Sort of thing Liam Gallagher would do. You can sort of imagine, there are parallels, I think, with that, with sport, is that, I suppose Ben Foster's kind of like the modern day exponent of that. But you're right, it's really, I worry that I've become a bit too cynical and always think, well, it's a PR stunt. Oh, Jurgen Klopp's written to a 10-year-old Irish kid and it's just happened to end up in the papers.
Yeah.
But I suppose if this has always gone on, then maybe we should be a little less cynical about some of the modern acts.
Klopp is one of the few I would think twice about with that. He feels like a genuine person, doesn't he?
Yes, and I think Guardiola maybe as well.
Yeah.
Maybe Mourinho.
Maybe, yeah. Okay, so you're 7, you love football. When do you start to love politics?
About the age of 9.
Okay, not too long after.
No, I remember the 92 election, so I would have been 9 in that summer.
How does one love politics at 9 years old?
I remember thinking very early in life, the world just seemed very unfair. Now, maybe that's just because, we lived in a tough part of Nottingham, in the inner city, in a single family on benefit. So maybe you're sort of more acutely aware that I don't even think you think about it in these terms, but you're sort of aware that
there's an injustice, maybe.
Yeah, I've certainly felt that. And then I remember the day Thatcher left, and my mum was sort of very animated about it. But my mum was a Labour voter, but it wasn't a political house. We didn't have political literature in the house or political books, or there weren't political discussions. It wasn't like the Miliband's upbringing or anything like that. It was just, we were normal. My mum was just a normal Labour voter. And then I remember in 1992 when the cars would come around with the loudhailers on top and getting Labour stickers and putting them in my window. And then I think the years that followed that, from the age of 9 to the age of 14, were 5 years where Labour goes from this crushing defeat in 1992 to this pinnacle of victory in 1997. That's a victory like no other, really. And to grow along with that at the time was really quite a remarkable thing to watch. Because even at the age of 9, people were saying, well, maybe Labour will just never win again. Right. I remember those conversations.
A bit like now.
Well, yes, a bit like now, yeah. I think Labour's further away now than it was in 1992. But I just found that such an addictive period.
It strikes me that it sounds quite similar to being a football fan, particularly when you're that age, right? If you got the stickers and you put them in your window and you remember the fandom and the cars going past and presumably the community aspect to it as well. At
Definitely.
that age, do you think it's the same sort of thing or the same kind of impulse that's triggered in someone?
Oh, definitely. And there's an impulse, and there's a kind of tribal element to it.
Yeah,
where that's your team. So I feel that less now.
Is Tony Blair your Brian Clough? Oh
yeah, I think he is. Yeah, and similarly, if you want to sort of draw the parallel, I think it would be very odd for Forest fans to start saying, "Well, Clough was a sellout. I don't think we should listen to Clough. We should listen to Joe Kinnear." He was really what Forest was all about.
What is Clough's equivalent of invading Iraq? Is there one?
Maybe relegation in 1993.
Maybe.
But I don't think he thought that was a good idea. That's the difference. No. I don't think Clough would still say, based on the intelligence I had at the time, I think we were right to get relegated.
Right, yeah.
I'm not sure the parallels always transfer. But, I think one thing that sport teaches you is you listen to winners, and winning is important. Although, actually, I think there are weird parallels where I remember so many football fans say, I'd rather be in the Championship. I just cannot... The nonsense of that drives me mad. In fact, I remember a couple of seasons ago when we only stayed in the Championship by goal difference, when we beat Ipswich on the last game of the season, I had friends saying, well, I think relegation would do us good. To League One. And we'd been in League One for 3 years and it was hell.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those things where I don't know whether it's a coping mechanism where people just... The frustration, obviously, with Forest is, and partly it is generational. People older than me remember when we were a second division provincial club then. I remember us a top flight club with a big manager, with England players.
Yeah.
So this is unusual for me, even though it's been now the majority of my life, 21 years in the
that's interesting.
Out of the Premier League. My perspective is we're a big club and we need to get back to those days.
Right.
That's tempered by the reality of the history that I know. But a lot of fans are kind of nostalgic for basically shit football.
Right, yeah.
And I just think that's so weird.
I mean, like, my uncle is a Norwich fan.
Yeah.
And so I guess they're, in recent years, more of a yo-yo club than Forest are. But whenever they do get relegated, as it looks like they might be about to be in the summer, I think it probably is a bit of a coping mechanism. He says that. He says, I'd rather be in the Championship anyway. But his justification is that the away days are a lot more fun. And this is a man who travels to games almost every weekend as and when he can. So I remember him saying when they were promoted that he was most excited about visiting some different cities for a bit. Yeah. And after, halfway through the season, I don't know, I think he'd found some of the bigger stadiums and some of the more corporate feel to it a little bit, maybe, I don't know, disaffecting, a little bit boring. And something for him yearns to go to Brentford again.
I mean Brentford is one of the best away days, and sadly that's not going to exist next year.
No, right? There's the one with the 4 pubs, isn't it?
Pub on every corner. Yeah. Although I think maybe 1 or 2 have closed, but the Griffin's really good, and it's a terraced away end, which is just such a novelty.
Yeah, yeah.
So it is, and it's a very friendly place to go.
But I guess if Forest haven't been in the Premier League for how long?
21 years.
21 years. Okay. Well, you're probably desperate for it then, right?
Can't wait.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean not looking bad. You're in the playoff positions, right?
Yes, we're 4th at the time of recording.
How are you feeling about it?
We've got an awful record in the playoffs. We've never, in the 4 times we've tried to get promoted, we've never got to a playoff final. We've always just not got past the semis. I think maybe that would be different maybe this season, but I just hate them. I hate the playoffs. And I've always been of the view that they're very entertaining for people who aren't involved in them. I think they're a disgraceful way to decide it. Right. Now, obviously, if we finish 4th, 5th or 6th, then it gives you the chance to go up. But it's always slightly annoyed me.
Yeah. I guess a big part of it is because there's a lot of money involved.
Of course, yeah. Well, that's a big part of everything.
So you said before that you don't feel the same kind of... I mean, obviously, you love Forest, but you say you don't feel quite the same... I don't want to misquote you. What did you say? In that your affiliation with it is not quite as...
I meant my tribal affiliation with Labour.
With Labour,
it's not the same. Yeah.
Do you feel the same with Forest as you did?
Oh yes, I'm as obsessed with Forest. I mean, the frustration I do have is just with myself that I can't get to as many games as I used to.
Yeah. Okay.
But I need Forest not being in the Premier League has kind of not affected my personality, but it's something that I dwell on so often.
Yeah.
I just need to see us get promoted again. It would be a big part of making me a happier person. So yes, I still feel it as much as I ever did.
I wonder what a therapist would say about that. I don't know. Is it externalising your...
I've thought about this a lot in terms of why I was so drawn to, say, Brian Clough.
Yeah.
And my own, probably deeply inaccurate crap analysis would be, because I was brought up by my mum and grew up with my sister as well, that in some way it's a search for a male role model, for a father figure, whether it's Brian Clough or whoever, Stewart Pearce.
Yeah.
I don't know whether there's any truth to that, but it sort of sounds like it makes a little bit of sense.
It probably is, right? I mean, also Brian Clough, as you say, is so enigmatic as to fill all vacuums. Presumably he would have been able to be that for you, as I'm sure Ferguson was for Man United fans of that age as well, right?
Yeah, and Clough felt like the leader of Nottingham. Like, he went beyond football. And obviously for people who remember the period slightly before really I was around, is he transcended football. He was a chat show star. He was everywhere. He was a celebrity, as much as he was a football manager. So, and that applied in Nottingham as well. He wasn't just seen as the manager of the football team. Really, he was seen as the leader of the city. And Nottingham was a relatively small place, really, compared to places like Manchester or obviously London. So he really filled that stage. Yeah. I remember when he got Freeman of the City in 1993, when it was all starting to fall to pieces. Thousands of people in the Market Square just to see him get his... effectively a local OBE, I guess, and he got an OBE as well, but just an adoration for him as an individual, not just for his achievements.
And he was famously left-wing in his politics as well, right?
Yes, I think the Labour Party had tried to get him to stand numerous times.
Right. Did that influence you at all?
I think I was too young to kind of really fully appreciate that, but obviously when you're growing up and you realise he's Labour as well, that's kind of like a cool thing, but he's probably way to the left of me.
Right, yeah. This is a time as well, I think. I don't know what you think about this, or if this is inaccurate or not, but I feel like, particularly in the 90s, and maybe this was just a New Labour thing, there seemed to be a more close alignment between politics or frontline politics and popular culture, including football. And I remember, I mean, I was very young at the time, but I remember Tony Blair's attempts to kind of engage with a football crowd and the whole Oasis thing, you know. And I feel like culture and politics have sort of shifted apart a little bit more now. I mean, I know that you have David Cameron getting his club wrong. I mean, I don't know if Boris Johnson has ever mentioned a football team. I feel like politics and football are further away than they were. Do you think that's...
Yeah, and I think that's probably a signal that mainstream politics is kind of away from mainstream people.
You don't think football's drifted?
Football has definitely changed in terms of what it, as a product in a way.
Is it harder for politicians to get behind Man City, for example, than it would have been 20 years ago?
I mean, I don't think it should be. I don't. If you're a Man City fan as a politician, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't still. I mean, they've had the most amazing period.
Right, yeah.
I think maybe more. I think football's gone in a way where so much of society has, where when I was growing up, and I still believe this, a football fan is someone who goes to games. Whereas we've lived in a period in the Premier League era where increasingly being a football fan is about watching it at home on a big telly.
Yeah.
And that's great. And you can watch, the Premier League is phenomenal to watch. And I love watching it. But going to games, football culture has changed, I think.
Yeah.
For better and for worse. The stadiums are safer. There's less hooliganism, certainly than when I first started going. And it's less prejudiced and all the rest of it. There's still big problems, but it's nowhere near as widespread as it was.
It's been a bit gentrified, really.
It has, for better and for worse.
Yeah.
And the behaviour's improved. That's not... I mean, the danger, I think, with that is the assumption that regressive social values in football stadiums were because there were more working class people there than there are now. Plenty of working class people were horrified by racism and homophobia and hooliganism and misogyny. So it's not just about that. But I think football, as with so many other things, music has changed in that period as well. And if you think about Cool Britannia, one of the things that Noel Gallagher always says about Nebworth and that period is Oasis really were the last big band before the internet.
Right.
When people still had to queue up and buy CDs. And that you've lost that tangible relationship with music.
I guess you see it a little bit, you saw it a little bit with Corbyn in the lead up to, actually it was more in the lead up to the 2017 election, I feel like, than the 2019 election, but him meeting and interviewing with Stormzy and attending, he was at Glastonbury, wasn't he?
Yes.
And he was interviewed in the NME and stuff. I guess there's maybe some crossover between popular culture and politics there, but did it never happen with the Tories? I mean, I don't remember really, but maybe it is, in my memory, it is just a New Labour thing rather than a sort of political thing.
I think they had like, it depended on your view of whether these people are cool or not, but the Tories had like Phil Collins and people like that. Yes. I think whenever you get a kind of thing like Britpop, where it's predominantly working class lads, like Oasis and the Verve and whatever, at that time they were just more likely to be Labour. I'm not sure the same would necessarily be true now. I'm not sure Stormzy would be as vocal in his support for Corbyn.
Right.
I think the shine sort of came off Corbyn in many ways. Glastonbury, of course, was Corbyn's kind of core constituency, really. And I thought it was really telling. I was at both of them. I thought it was amazing that he didn't go to the last one. I thought that was a real sign that he'd kind of realised that perhaps
maybe
he wouldn't get the reception that he
be.
got. I mean, I just think those things are always, no matter how popular the politician, I would always advise a politician not to walk out on the pitch at a football stadium.
Right, yeah.
Because
someone's
the
going to
risk, because even if they like you, people might not necessarily want to be that vocal in a football stadium about liking whoever.
Yeah.
And I also think, be a football fan, fine, go and watch it. Don't try and use it. If you try and wrap yourself in it, I think it looks too cynical.
This is going to be one of my questions, because I feel like you see a lot of obviously in the lead up to general elections, politicians and political parties try to use whatever cultural group that they can to levy results, right?
Of course.
And I feel like, maybe this is just retrospective, as I said, I was quite young, but I feel like Tony Blair did that quite well with football or football culture in the 90s. And that no one really tried to do that in the last 10 years. I can't remember that happening or being a feature of any political campaign. And I just wondered why. Do you think it is because it's too much of a risk, or it seemed to be too cynical a thing to do?
Maybe. I mean, I don't think politicians are ever beyond doing the cynical thing, regardless of whether they're left wing or right wing.
I would have thought football's a huge group of people. Like, why wouldn't you try to get football fans on your side?
I mean, I think it probably happens more at a local level.
Right.
I'm always deeply cynical of, and I shouldn't be, and I thought about this on the way here, so I thought we might talk about it. MPs who aren't from the area who become the MP for, say, Leeds, right?
Yeah.
And then they're from, say, Nottingham, and they grew up a Forest fan, and then all of a sudden they're putting a Leeds scarf over their jacket shoulders. Now, of course, it's insane to not get behind the local thing,
right?
Whether it's the local brewery or the local library, football team. So it goes with that. So I don't blame people for doing that. But I'm always just a bit like, oh, you've just moved to the area to be the MP, and all of a sudden you're this super fan.
What would you do in that scenario if you were the new MP for Leeds? Would you not put a Leeds scarf on and say, "Hey, I'm a Forest fan, but I am here for you guys"?
Oh no! I wouldn't put a Leeds. I wouldn't ever. No, I wouldn't wear the scarf of another, unless you were there at like some charity do or whatever. I think that's different.
Right. Okay.
But I wouldn't go and pretend to be a Leeds fan. I would, if you're the local MP, of course you would wish some success for the local people, whoever they are. But I think pretending to support a football club when you already support one, I think is peculiar. And the giveaway is always still wearing a jacket, but with a pristine scarf over the back, almost like a vicar wears those things. I mean, obviously you can't have Corbyn going to Arsenal games in a Stone Island top, so fair enough. And
Corbyn is an Arsenal fan, right? As is John McDonnell. Is that what's your take on that? Because it seemed fairly genuine to me, but I don't know.
I don't know, to be honest.
I mean, he's been MP for Islington.
Yeah, I mean, he's from Shrewsbury, so
right. Technically,
why is he supporting Arsenal?
How dare he?
Yeah, I mean, they're big clubs, whatever, fine. Maybe he only got to, as well. And I think this is a personality failing of my own I recognise is people get into football too late. I just think, well, then you are just using it because why wouldn't you have supported your local team? I've got a real thing about local teams.
It's a tough one though, isn't it? I'm just playing devil's advocate. I don't wish to defend
I'm a cynical
politicians.
I think that's all it is.
But I wonder if, even if you aren't really a football fan, and I think probably from the fans' assumption is that most politicians, as a result of being a politician and the life choices that they will have made, are not football fans, right? And maybe the odd one out actually is. But let's say you are, 37 years old, you become the MP for Leeds, you haven't been a football fan before now, forget about Clough, forget about Forest. Yeah. But you find yourself engrossed in a community which is broadly supportive of you and has just voted you in, and you're visiting all the local bakeries, and you're going to the village fete, and you're invited to the football club, and you put the scarf on, and you think, oh, maybe I'll give it a try now. Maybe these people are nice, and I'm going to see what football's about. Is it possible?
I think it is, yeah. But as a football fan, I'd still be like,
Who are the football fans then? Who are the real... I mean, you've met a lot of politicians. Who are the real football fans?
Alistair Campbell is a genuine obsessive.
Sure.
Full-on obsessive.
And Gordon Brown, apparently, he said
Gordon Brown,
well.
Gordon Brown's genuinely into it.
He's a Man United fan,
I always got the impression from talking to Tony Blair he was genuinely into it.
I always felt like Tony Blair was just pretending a little bit, but was bolstered by the fact that, Brown and Campbell were.
Yeah. Who else is there that's really... Oh, Toby Perkins, the MP for Chesterfield, is a big football fan.
Right.
Who else are the ones that I know? Oh, God.
What about Dominic Cummings? He said something about football recently. I meant to read this before you arrived. But
I should have read it.
He said something... maybe we should look this up quickly. I tell you what, give me 2 seconds because it was interesting. I briefly read about it the other day. Oh, I can't. It's not coming up immediately. Never mind. Anyway, he said something about football, but you don't know if he's a football fan or not.
I've got no idea.
Do we know
what was it, positive
him?
or negative? Or was he trying
it was an intention to do something. I don't know if it was a policy pledge or
fans
if it
on
was,
boards or safe standing or something.
It wasn't that. It was football would view it as negative. and fans would maybe view it as positive. I can't remember what it was.
Oh, God.
Should have looked it up before you arrived.
I should have known what it is. I can't believe this has passed me by.
It was a small little thing. I think I saw it in The Guardian, but we'll look it up afterwards anyway. But we don't know much about him in that regard, maybe. You would assume not, right?
He doesn't fit, I mean, just based on the way he dresses. Although I say that, this is part of the problem with non-football people's view of football sometimes is... I have to explain this to people. Most football fans are not trying to be in the football factory and are not geezers or hooligans. Sure. Like, it attracts, on the most part, normal people, and in a large part, a kind of nerdy kleptomania, retention of stats. Now, it's not that you sit at home, although I'm sure some people do, and read all the old Division 1 titles and all the rest of it. It's just that this thing is so big in your life. There's such vivid memories. You remember the scorelines, you remember the players. And I think that then encourages something in. I mean, my mum's always on at me that I've basically left all my programmes at her house. I've got hundreds of Forest
You've got a lot of memorabilia.
Loads, yeah, and I'm obsessed with it. And I do a Forest podcast with Paul McGregor, who played for Forest in the 90s. And he's just baffled as to why I'm always asking people, have they kept their shirts, their medals? And they seem to view that, certainly footballers prior to this generation, as quite an odd question.
Right. It's a bit nerdy, isn't it, I suppose? It's funny that that's a kind of nerd trend within football fandom. Again, it's the sort of thing you would expect wouldn't exist based on the stereotypes, but definitely does, right?
Yeah,
I mean, they still sell programs.
Badges, scarves,
right.
Programs, autographs.
How many autographs do you have?
Oh, hundreds.
Really?
I've got a phenomenal collection of not just Nottingham Forest autographs, but in the Premier League years, I had a season to get the main stand, which is what has the players' car park in it, including the visiting team. So I'd get to kick off 3 hours before, I'd get to the stadium 3 hours before kick-off.
Wow.
John Barnes, Ian Rush, Jamie Redknapp, Vialli, Di Matteo, Alex Ferguson, Keegan Ginola, Aspria.
Yeah.
Just reams of these. Liverpool, Arsenal, Man United, Newcastle, those big teams. Chelsea. So many of those.
Wow.
Yeah, just reams and reams of autographs in little books and things.
Does it have sentimental value to you still?
Massive.
Right.
Massive.
And you keep it forever?
Yes, I would never part with any of that stuff.
Right. It's a real burden for your children.
It is, yeah. I mean, I if I ever have them, but what a great thing to pass on. I think I've got a shirt that I get signed by every guest of this Forest podcast. So I've got this replica 1979 European Cup final shirt signed by John Robertson, Frank Clark, John McGovern, and then Andy Reid. Like all these different generations of Forest players. Steve Chettle. Yeah. We had Shane Meadows on, even as an Notts County fan, so he signed it. So it's got like this weird mix of broadly Forest autographs on it.
Oh, that sounds cool.
I'll get that frame one day.
Right, maybe you could be buried in it.
That is a great... Oh, man, buried in a full kit.
Why not? If they're still burying by then. Maybe you'd have to burn it along with your body, I don't know.
If I could be burned in a Forest kit.
Yeah. Your ashes
I wonder
mixed
what
forever.
Kit I'd be burned in. I think... The 1991 FA Cup final kit is still my favourite.
Sure, okay. We'll add that to the list when we burn the body. So you're also a fantastic comedian.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you to say.
You're welcome. Football, comedy, where's the crossover there? Apart from you and Ellis James. Not necessarily in people, but like, have you got football jokes that you can get in?
Oh, that is a really good point.
Because it feels like not that. I don't know if it's just the comedy that I see, but I don't see the crossover that much.
No, not many people do football comedy. That's a very good point. I mean, my first Edinburgh show, I had a few kind of stories in there that were football related. I mean, occasionally, because I'll do like the odd impression, I'll try and crowbar in. I'll use like a football thing as maybe a device. So I had an old routine about, what was it now? Basically, if transfer deadline. Basically, I can't remember what the thing was, but if it was done on like transfer deadline day, so right. Jim White basically talking about politics. So there was a way really to get an impression in, but then you're kind of doing observational stuff about Soccer Saturday or Stelling without going, so I was kind of using it as a way to do political material, but really it was an observation about. So you can do it with stuff like that. And occasionally I think I'll maybe get in like a football analogy or something. I think in the end, you end up, your references are all the things you're watching and consuming, aren't they? So I will often use football as an analogy without doing material that is exclusively about football.
And as a result of being a comedian, you are presumably on the road often.
Yeah.
So that impacts your ability to go to Forest games, right?
It has had an awful effect.
Right.
And particularly, I do a radio show on Saturdays, Rock and Roll Football on Absolute, between 2 and 5.
Great, by the way.
Oh, well, that's very kind. But it's completely taken me out of the game.
Right, yeah.
So it's been really...
Good and bad, I suppose.
Yeah, I do feel quite emotional about it. And I wonder, I've thought this about myself, and I suppose there's a wider political point here about identity and whether I feel it more keenly because I've moved away from Nottingham.
Yeah.
And whether... I mean, I was fanatical as a kid, so it's not as if I would never went. I had a season ticket every year that I was there. But since I've moved away, I think I'm more likely to buy, say, a kit and a shirt because I'm not there anymore, or I'm not there as much. So it means I kind of want to sort of hold on to that as well as... I don't know, I'm not expressing this very well, but I wonder if that's about whether there are sort of political implications to that. With Brexit and things, people sort of... Or maybe expats is kind of... I'm basically like a Nottingham expat in London where I've become more Nottingham since I moved away.
There'll be a Nottingham club down here. So
there is, the London Trickies. They meet at the... I think they watch the games at the Comedy Pub now. Oh, no, it's not. No, it's not. It's the Bar and Grill, I think, at the Sports Bar and Grill, I think, at Marylebone Station.
Yeah.
But again,
which is nice, your little expat community.
Yes, it is, yeah. And I think then I'm more likely to wear Forest stuff now than I probably would have been.
Right. You're probably pretty safe wearing... you're safe wearing Forest stuff everywhere nowadays, but you're probably pretty safe wearing Do you wear Forest stuff to away days?
No. I think you have to be careful just in case you get on a train or whatever.
Yeah.
So I would never wear anything branded. I've got 2 Forest jackets. One's like a kind of little waterproof. It's not really that waterproof. But another one's like basically a padded Adidas like manager's coat.
Yeah.
Which is the warmest coat I've got, and I wear it around. And occasionally, my girlfriend or a dad will go, "Are you sure you want to wear that?" Around, but I'm like, no one's going to give me grief for wearing Forest.
No.
I wouldn't wear it in Derby or Leicester. I'm not an idiot.
Sure.
Or maybe not in Leeds or Man. But you just like in London, it's an international city anyway, isn't it?
Sure.
And occasionally you wear it and people go, "You Reds," on the other side of the streets. And then you think,
one of me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a way to find other Forest fans.
Yeah.
I kind of forgot that it's got the crest on it now. It's just a coat. But
do you have shorts and socks?
I've got shorts.
Do you ever do the full kit thing?
No. Although I do like use kits as pajamas, really. So sometimes I'm in bed in pretty much a full kit.
In a very vulnerable state.
Apart from the socks.
Right,
I don't think the last time I actually possessed a full kit was probably in the 90s.
Right, yeah. And do you play football?
So there's comedians football every Tuesday, but I haven't played for ages. I'm very susceptible to injury.
Right.
And without going into too much detail, I've basically had an awful time with... I'm asthmatic, and I've just had the last few years I've had a recurring chest complaint.
Right.
So I haven't been able to play, which has been a real shame because it was just socially it was great fun.
Hey, coronavirus is no good for you, huh?
No, well, I'm really worried about... Well, I'm not hysterical about it, but I am slightly like...
I've got a lung thing as well, and my girlfriend thinks I'm insane, but I'm washing my hands all the time.
Yes, you just have to be careful, I think, especially in London where there's just so many people.
Yeah.
You are more kind of vulnerable in a way. So I am taking precautions, but I haven't played football for ages. No. But I play football in the way that I think Stewart Pearce plays football. Quite physical.
Right.
And emotional.
How it should be played, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Who's good? When you go to comedians football, who's good?
Russell Howard is very good.
Is he?
Yeah, there was
a guy... He looks quite athletic, doesn't he?
He's really good, yeah. Low centre of gravity.
Right.
Low centre of gravity, and can turn well, and he's technically gifted.
Right.
Milton Jones is good. Tim Vine's good.
Yeah.
Daniel Kitson's good.
Daniel Kitson's good?
Yeah.
That surprises me. Daniel Kitson strikes me as someone who would hate football.
He loves it. He's really good at it. He basically runs it. Yeah. Oh, God, I don't know who supports, but he's good at playing it. Tom Parry from Pappy's is very good at playing.
Yeah.
Who else? So I haven't been for a while. Yeah, so it's a sort of mixture of aptitudes, so it kind of levels it out.
Oh, nice. That sounds fun. I've heard about this. Is there a politics football game going on somewhere? Or I know there's like a football journalists game that goes on. I assume there's one for every sort of little subgroup.
Oh, I'm not sure there are enough political comedians to kind of...
Oh, no, just politicians, I mean.
Oh, well, Keir Starmer plays five-a-side, doesn't he?
I tried to get Keir Starmer on the podcast, but he never replied to my email.
You might have to wait until the contest is over.
This was like a year ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I would have thought it would have been, maybe not.
I think it'd be up his street. We should have thought of him earlier in terms of... I think he's a genuine football fan.
Yes, he does. He plays a lot, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And apparently he's quite good.
Yeah. In fact, I think I heard that on your podcast.
Oh, maybe you did.
I'm pretty sure I did. I was thinking, well, how do I know that? It's
Yeah.
because of you. Yeah. You've interviewed all of the candidates for the...
I have, yeah. For the Labour leadership, yeah.
That's really cool, isn't it?
I think so. Someone is... And I have almost that kind of approach... that from a football fans thing of almost you want to kind of complete the set.
Right, yeah.
And it's cool to talk to people who are doing it. And there's a magic about that, whether I agree with them or not, whether I would ever vote for them or not.
Sure.
I think there is something about politics that sets it apart. And I'm interested into why people go in, why they make the decisions they make. And with all the people, I think you get a sense of, are these people open-minded and are they open to kind of self-analysis?
Right.
And I just think that's so fascinating in that world.
Do you think Keir Starmer's going to win?
At the moment, it looks like he is, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
predicting politics is so hard now. All the rules feel like they've been torn up. But if the sort of polling we're seeing is correct, then yeah, I think he's won, yeah.
Just a quick interlude in today's episode for me to remind you that this episode is supported by The Athletic. Now, you may remember from a few minutes ago, I was telling Matt about the story of Brian Clough written by Daniel Taylor. It was Daniel Taylor, and it is in The Athletic, and it is genuinely one of the most interesting and heartwarming pieces of football writing I think I've ever read. And I mean that genuinely. It made me cry when I read it. It's a really beautiful story, and it's called The Remarkable Tale of Two Boys Who Went Begging for Pennies and Ended Up Living with Brian Clough. It's really, really worth reading. I obviously described it a little bit in the podcast itself, but yeah, as I said, it moved me greatly. And it's super worth having a look at. So I'm going to put the link to it in the description to today's podcast, and you can get a 7-day free trial by using our sign-up link. So if you want to go and read that piece, I would highly encourage you to do so. It's not just for Forest fans. Like, it's honestly, it's as I said, it's really, really moving, and it's an excellent piece written by Daniel Taylor, who, of course, everything the man writes is incredible. I'm hoping we can get him on the podcast at some point soon. That would be cool, huh? But anyway, if you go to theathletic.co.uk/Tifo, you can get a 7-day free trial there. Go and read this, and I'm confident that if you do, you will feel good about taking up the 50% off offer, which means it's about £2.50 a month, which is great because it's super affordable, it's ad-free, and it has all of the best writing, not just about your club, but also about football that's happening around the world. So yeah, that's theathletic.co.uk/Tifo. Thank you for listening, and back to the episode. Okay, can we take a little swerve here and talk about Qatar? Yeah, the Qatar World Cup. I mean, it's being held in the winter 2022, so we're still nearly 3 years away from it at this point. But it seems to me to be a pretty significant moment in the history of football, and I don't think people are really talking about it very much. So we try to talk about it here all the time.
I think it's one of the most depressing decisions.
Yeah.
I think it's awful. I mean, for so long, as a football fan, you've basically had to suffer immorality and amorality, and that was about whether that's footballers' private lives or whatever. Football has not done itself a great service a lot of the time. Still does a lot of good, and I think things have improved. But the people in charge of football, specifically FIFA, I think have just been disgraceful. And there's just so many things wrong with it.
Right.
Everything is wrong with Qatar. Absolutely everything is wrong with it. It can't host a Summer World Cup, so everyone's seasons now are ruined by that thing. The treatment of the workers is a disgrace.
Yeah.
And how can you allow it to happen? It's wasteful. The way in which the bid was handled, Why do you have to announce 2018 and 2022 together? That only encourages corruption.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously from an England point of view, and I always try and check myself when it comes to England and Britain in terms of, I would never want to think that we overlook our own shortcomings or that we're not realistic about our role in things. But we could host a World Cup tomorrow, and it's a disgrace that we didn't get that. The 2018 one still winds me up as much as 2022, really. I just think the whole thing stank.
Yeah.
I feel really, I feel cheated, and I just think, whatever our shortcomings as a nation, when it comes to football, there are many. It's the home of association football. We have the stadiums, we have the infrastructure to be able to host it. You could probably host a World Cup in London.
Right. You definitely could.
We've been cheated out of it. That is an injustice, and it really is. And I'm still, there's certain elements of sour grapes about it. It really annoys me that we've been done out of that. Yeah. And I think partly the Euro 2020 thing of hosting it across the continent, which I also think is an awful idea.
Why do you think that's a bad idea?
Because one of the great benefits of like major tournaments is, and it's one of the great powerful things about football, is its ability, almost just through association, to culturally educate people about different parts of the world. And you get to know the geography of these countries and phrases and foods and all that. And football's been a great driver of educating people around the world about different parts of the world. And obviously it's done a lot of social good, as much as the problems that do come with it. So then what's the point in having it all across Europe? And for fans, I'm always so cynical about this stuff. I'm like, they just want to make money on flights and hotels and all that. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I just think they think we'll make shitloads of money out of this. And what we'll do, we'll give Wembley the final, and that shuts the English up for a bit.
And the semi-final one.
Yeah, I think they'll go, well, you basically hosted that, so that's you done for 30 years or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so to take the counter-argument with some of the elements of your argument there to the World Cup, is there a case to say that, yes, obviously the first thing on the list is the treatment of migrant workers and the kafala system employed in the Gulf states, and that it's fucking dreadful, and there's so many infringements on human rights, it's hard to count on one hand, right?
Yeah.
Is there an argument to say that most people didn't know what or where Qatar was beforehand? As you say about the benefits of hosting a tournament in one place, you learn the geography of the area, you learn the culture of the area, and however microscopic it might appear to have been the shifts in domestic policy in Qatar since, as a result of the international community having two eyes on Qatar because of the World Cup, is there an argument to say that after 2022, the situation for workers in Qatar will be improved ever so slightly as a result of the World Cup in a way that it wouldn't have been otherwise, and that to engage rather than to back away from is the right attitude? I mean, there's a parallels with politics here, and that's why it's an interesting question to talk to you about, because if you're a politician, how do you approach a situation like that?
I think there's so many different strands. So firstly, I don't think you should ever punish the people of a country because of the regime running it.
Sure.
That said, I think, well, let's see what happens, right? But let's say Qatar becomes a bit more liberal during the tournament. I have no faith at all that once that tournament is over, things then don't go back to the way they are. Sure. I severely doubt whether conditions would stay improved, if they improve at all during that period, or attitudes of the regime towards gay people would change as a result of that tournament. They might put on a bit of a show. I think the danger is you legitimise these people. You give them... Right. You saw it in Russia in 2018, and I never forget, I can't remember who it was, but it was a pundit on a major broadcaster when it was raised about Russia, and they said, well, I've got to say, we've been very well treated. Like, you're missing the point, and that it just proves that shipping people out there, putting them in nice hotels and giving them a nice breakfast creates an impression where pundits can say, well, you know what, was not the point. The point wasn't you couldn't get a nice hotel room or that you couldn't watch football over there. Right. It was that you give legitimacy. And Russia deliberately, at the Sochi Olympics, it had the Winter Olympics and obviously the major tournament the World Cup.
Which was an amazing World Cup. Not in terms of the hosting, but like the football was incredible.
And that creates an impression where you go, oh, Russia was great. You know,
Right.
now, fair enough. Russia as a country obviously has a lot to offer the world.
Yeah.
Apart from its regime. I just worry, I think. And part of the problem is, it's been the accumulation of Russia and Qatar. You go, oh, Matt, can you not give it? If you're going to give it to Russia, don't give it to Qatar as well. Give it to Russia and then give it, somewhere that isn't having these issues. Or actually say, if you want to host these tournaments, you have to meet a threshold first.
Right. Which I think is part of the rules. But
Apparently
the threshold was
these rules obviously aren't.
a little flexible, yeah. I remember my favourite story about the bidding process or the announcement was an interview done by a journalist called James Montague, who, if you haven't heard of him, read some of his books. He's incredible. But he interviewed an ex-MI6 agent who was working on the World Cup bid it was in Switzerland? I can't remember where it was. I think it might have been in Switzerland. Anyway, he describes the moment that the Russians arrived, the camp arrived, and they knew that they'd arrived because suddenly all of the communications for the other countries were jammed for the duration of the bidding process. Wow. And that was the kind of signal that the Russians were there. Is like, right, there's no more communications for you guys.
My word.
I was just thinking that was it seemed like such an old school thing to do.
So brazen as well.
Well, that's Putin though, isn't it? I mean, I feel like whenever I see Putin at a global conference or interviewed in front of an audience, he's asked a question about some controversy and he'll look down the camera and basically say, like, what the fuck are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Which I find funny as well as finding terrifying.
Yes, it would just be nice if, to bring it back to football, the people who ran football were more mindful of stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah. Which appears not to be the case at all.
I think things are changing. I think certainly, and again, not to overlook the problems we have at home, I think Gareth Southgate has been a positive influence on English football way more than just on the pitch, and has shown people what a kind of modern England can look like in so many ways. And I think that's one small grain of hope I take from this period.
So how do you deal with Qatar then, as a fan?
I don't think I'll go.
No.
Although I don't know. I mean, I say that. What am I saying that for?
I feel similarly because I anticipate that for my job, I am going to cover it.
Yeah.
But I feel a conflict there, and I suppose then, covering it in the best way we can is important. But just as a supporter, I know of people who say they're not going to watch.
How can you not watch it? That's the problem.
I mean, literally, how it's on everywhere. But
and also, I love England so much. I just can't not watch it.
Does that make you a hypocrite?
Yeah, on some level, yeah, but that's the part of the thrill of the human experience is being a contradictory, two-faced bastard.
That's the best comeback to that I've ever heard. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's quite a bit of a sour note to end on, isn't it? So instead, can I ask you now? So we're going to pivot from Qatar to Brexit Pursued by a Bear, which is your
that's
current
very
show.
kind of you.
As I say, I'm going to see it next week, so I haven't seen it yet, but I'm very excited, and it's on in London next week, and you're in all of these other cities.
So
people can go to your website, presumably, to find...
Yes, mattforde.com/live. I'm doing the South Bank Centre on the 10th and 27th of March, and a date in May as well. But Darlington, Hexham, Bedford, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Sheffield, Nottingham, all over the place. I lose track of them all.
I've never interviewed a comedian before, so I don't know the etiquette. Is it okay to ask you to sort of say what the show is about? Or
that's a very polite way of asking. I mean, it's a bang up to date satirical show taking the piss out of all of them.
Right.
So whether you're Leave or Remain, Labour or Tory, everyone gets it.
Right.
So I take the piss out of Boris, Corbyn, the SNP, Farage, Leavers, Remainers and Trump. And I try and make it as ludicrous and as fun as possible. So it's not a heavy night out. It's.
Do you have to keep rewriting? I mean, presumably less so now, but if you had to keep rewriting it...
Oh, yeah.
Is
always.
that good or bad?
It's a fucking nightmare. You know what? I love to... Sometimes I think, well, this is a great creative challenge, and what a thrill to have a job where you're writing jokes about what's happening, you can go out on stage that night. Another part of me thinks, oh, man.
Yeah, right.
Never get a moment's peace. But, I think it's a treat overall. But yes, it's a nightmare to have to keep rewriting it. But if I'm someone who's saying to people, political comedy is something you should come and see, then I suppose that's part of part of the territory.
Sure, yeah. Well, listen, Matt Forde, thanks so much for
Thank you.
coming.
It's been a real pleasure.
Really appreciate it, and best of luck for your show and for Forest, of course, for the rest of the season.
Oh, man.
It's going to be good, maybe.
Fingers crossed.
All right, we'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Cheers.